Good morning and welcome into another episode of Vandy 24/7 Live. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, right here on the 440 Sports Network. Again, big shout out to our sponsors, the Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland and Belk, John Levin and his company, Wobble Bond Dickinson, and Yeaman Packaging Systems. Today, we're talking all things football with Robbie Weinstein. Got a chance to record an interview with him. And apologies, it wasn't live, but next week we'll start the live portions of the interviews with Robbie. He's tied up on Thursdays, but we're going to start a lot of live stuff with Robbie definitely next week. I'm trying to shoot for Monday, but we'll see about that. But we're talking all things Vanderbilt football. We talked a lot about the official announcement from Eli Stowers that he's coming back to Vanderbilt, with Pete Thamel of ESPN breaking that. So we'll dive into that and some of the things that Stowers could improve on. You know, I think it's really interesting. He's a mid-round draft pick right now, but I mean, if he has just some unbelievable season next year, could be a first rounder, could be an early second rounder. I do think so. I mean, he'd have to have a really good year. But we talked a lot about that. Also talked about the chase for Big Pete, Shiaz Pete, the New Mexico State offensive tackle. Vanderbilt is in pursuit of him, but so is just about everybody else. So he's joined the recruitment, but we talked with Robbie about that. Marlen Sewell coming back, talked about that, and a lot of other football topics, roster development here and roster management at Vanderbilt, and some of the burning questions that I've gotten on the board and that Chris and I talked about yesterday. But good conversation with Robbie. So that'll be coming up here in just a second. Also, we talked about the Stowers stuff, all SEC tight end coming back to Vanderbilt. He said he thought a lot about the NFL. As I said, he's projected as a mid-round draft pick, but he stayed at Vanderbilt because we're building something special. That's what Stowers said. So, again, that's the big news today. Eli Stowers coming back to Vanderbilt. Also, on Saturday, the basketball team heads to Columbia, Missouri. 2:30 tip-off between the Tigers and the Commodores. You can watch it on the SEC Network. You can listen to it on 102.5 The Game. Missouri walloped LSU on Tuesday night, a team that, of course, Vanderbilt opened their conference play by beating as well. So a couple of teams that have beaten LSU. Missouri had a tough loss at Auburn to open SEC play last week. So, every game's going to be tough. I know you look at the LSU game and you say, yeah, that's probably a team Vanderbilt could have and should have beaten. Well, they did, but they beat them by 8, and they had to really work for that. And then, of course, you saw what happened against Mississippi State. So Vanderbilt, Missouri on Saturday, and, of course, Joe will have a lot of the coverage there, and we'll have some post-game coverage as well. But we're going to go and hop into the interview with Robbie Weinstein. And before we do, get your questions in now. I'll answer those after this Robbie interview. So get your questions in now. Get some of your comments in now. And who knows, maybe Robbie answers one of the questions you have in mind. I tried to do a good job of getting a lot of the burning questions out there for Robbie. But here is that interview with Robbie Weinstein. Robbie Weinstein from right here at Vandy 24/7, joining me now to talk all things Vanderbilt football. And Robbie, I want to start with the news that came across today. Well, it wasn't news to us. You you reported it, a week or so ago, that Eli Stowers will be coming back along with, Jerry Kill and Diego Pavia and kind of a joint, we're coming back. But I mean, did you learn anything else? And then in the last week about that situation, it was interesting. The quote from him, he talked a lot about how he thought a lot about it, and that he's projected as a mid-round draft pick, but I mean, could potentially see him as a second round pick next year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I learned anything new about it over the last week, but I am, there's stuff that was behind the paywall for subscribers 2 or 3 weeks ago that I'm willing to share now, which is just that I think that I think that this is Eli Stowers' first season playing full-time tight end, and I think there were concerns on his side about, we hear a lot about in the NFL with quarterbacks how teams are really impatient and don't wait for developmental players, and I guess there's this feeling of maybe that's not just quarterbacks. And I think he wanted to be as prepared as possible by the time he gets to the league, because I do think even though he had a great season, there are still things that he can work on. Probably like how many jump balls did he go up and win this season? There were some for sure, but I think he could have done even better with that, and another year will help him out. He actually, I was told that he actually signed his deal with the Collective like 3 weeks ago or something. Now that doesn't keep him from entering the draft, and so I didn't do a ton with that, because you can, if it were me, I would probably sign my deal to make sure that I have something and then make a final decision. But it had been heading this way for a while, and I definitely think for sure, I mean, Pavia being able to come back and Jerry Kill coming back, Tim Beck, that definitely played a role. And it's huge for Vanderbilt, because I think their weapons on the outside in the passing game, other than Stowers, just didn't really do a lot this past season. And I'm not sure that they haven't made any like slam dunk additions in that area either through the transfer portal. So they really needed him back. And I think, that the reality that they were going to get him back probably factors into who they're pursuing in the portal as well.
I'm interested. You talk about how he can improve, and I completely agree. And you've watched a ton of football. You know scouts, within 24/7. Have you talked to anybody about like, hey, this is where Stowers could improve? And I know you talked about the jump balls, but he hasn't been a tight end for very long. Like that's kind of the fact of the matter. And it might surprise some people that he made this decision, but I'm interested to kind of pick your brain about, how do you think he can improve?
Well, if you think about it, the plays that stand out to me for him are more so plays where he was catching the ball within 5 or 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, or perhaps even behind it on those shovel passes against Alabama. And then he is just so athletic and fast for a tight end that then he does something with the ball. That's great. And I think NFL teams are interested in that. But I think for him to be able to make more contested catches and do a little bit more down the field, that could maybe help him. I thought he did a pretty good job of getting open, but I still think he can improve on that even further. I'm sure another season or another off season of maybe getting in the weight room, but especially I think working on route running could help him, because just in general with their receivers, they were scheming guys open at times, but I mean, these guys weren't winning a lot of one-on-ones. He, of course, did the best job of that by far, but I still think he can refine a lot of that. And then, of course, I think he actually got a lot better as a blocker throughout the season. He was kind of a non-blocker when he came to Vandy, and he threw some really good blocks in that bowl game. But I still think they kind of were tipping their plays, where if Stowers is off the field, you knew that they were going to run the ball probably. And so if he can improve in that area even more and become, at least a low-end NFL blocker at tight end, I think that would help as well.
Well, you talk about blockers. The latest offensive line commitment, Sterling Porcher from Texas Tech, is going to be blocking a lot, and projects as a starter. We're not saying he's going to start, but with the movement Vanderbilt has had on the offensive line and the guys they have brought in, you would imagine that he at least, if anything, competes for that starting job. Started all 10 games, for Texas Tech. Last year he played in. It's interesting, transferred from MTSU, so maybe some local ties there. I'm not sure if he played with Zaylen Wood at all, but what do you know about him, Robbie, and how can he help this team? Because I mean, you look at him size wise, and he fits the bill.
Yeah, they feel like he, from a physical standpoint, our evaluators feel the same way. They think that he really checks the boxes in terms of size and length and kind of athleticism, power. It's interesting. I use, to some extent, Pro Football Focus grades for offensive linemen. It's difficult to find a lot of tape unless you just go back and watch full games on YouTube, which aren't always available. And there are some limitations there, like PFF doesn't think he's a good player, but talking to our evaluators, they feel like it's difficult if you're Pro Football Focus to be able to evaluate every single play that an offensive lineman makes, because there are certain plays where, regardless of whether it's a tackle or guard, where you're not really blocking anybody because maybe the play is designed to go in a different direction. You don't know who's responsible for what entirely. So Vandy, that's all to say that PFF doesn't like him. It doesn't think he's good. Vandy thinks that he is a solid, experienced player who can come in and probably be reliable for them. And our evaluators actually see a little bit of upside because they like him from a physical specimen standpoint. So, I mean, my guess, given that he has played left tackle and left guard, that kind of translates a little bit more to the quick side of Vanderbilt's scheme. So I would currently have him projected as the starting quick guard. I don't, I think, how it goes. Like, they're going to mix and match throughout both spring ball and fall camp. I believe he's going to enroll in June, so we're not even going to see him in the spring. And the spring is going to give them a chance to get a look at some other guys, some younger guys, which I think they need, because they need Misael Sandoval. I think should have been playing probably last season, at least a little bit. They get more of a look at him, and then probably some of these other guys who are further down the depth chart need to decide whether they're going to move on or not.
I'm interested in the offensive line. You bring in Isaiah Glass, Jordan White as well from Liberty, Chase Mitchell still there, Stephen Hubbard still there. Who knows, what happens with Grayson Morgan? You would assume he is back. I mean, we don't know that yet, but you would assume that. And then you also have Cade McConnell. All of a sudden, Robbie, you're looking like a lot more depth for that offensive line coming into this season. How's it shaping out in your mind? I mean, because obviously, Grayson Morgan is a question mark still, but that's a big piece, a puzzle piece that can fit in here. In your mind, how's it shaping up, and does it look like an upgrade in the early stages, compared to last year?
Yeah, I think it's an upgrade. I think the depth is going to be better. Now, Hubbard, the NCAA fumbled this as they usually do. Their waiver, when they announced it, seemed like it applied to Hubbard and everyone. But you have to be within they later clarified a few days later that you need to be within your 5-year clock of when you graduated from high school to use it. So right now he's not going to be back. That could change, because I don't think that would hold up in court. So if somebody decides to challenge that, then it could change. And so I'm kind of waiting and seeing there. They need a tackle, of course. They need another tackle. Everybody knows they need another tackle. But, to be able to, with how many offensive linemen they needed, like 4, 5, 6 offensive linemen, I think it would have been a big ask to get all of that done in the winter window ahead of spring practice. So, I mean, I think they've done a reasonably good job. They're not going to have stars on the offensive line. I don't think. Maybe Jordan White could be, a low-level NFL draft pick. But I think that their depth is going to be improved. And I think, like, Isaiah Glass is probably fine. He's probably about what Gunnar Hansen was last season. Their interior play is probably going to be a little bit better. And I think, something that went under the radar is offensive line is a high injury rate position. They actually got pretty damn lucky in terms of the injuries not hitting the offensive line last season. Like, everybody of note played almost every game. And so if that were to happen, I don't know that you can count on that happening again in 2025. And so I think they're going to have better insurance policies if that happens. How much better will the top end starters be? I think they'll be a little bit better, but it's maybe from cutting out more of the fat, basically, rather than adding stars. Because, for instance, Chase Mitchell, I'm expecting him to move inside to guard. He was really poor at tackle, and I think he could be a good guard, because he's a strong guy, but he just didn't really have the length or the movement abilities to play tackle. So I think that they're going to be better. I don't think they're even probably going to be an average Power 4 offensive line, but I do think it's meaningful when you go from one of the worst in the Power 4 to just kind of below average. I think that could help them.
Big Pete, obviously, still up in the air. A lot of questions about that. What can you tell us there? And obviously, you would have thought, okay, played with Pavia a couple of years ago at New Mexico State.
Oh yeah,
big time prospect. But the schools that are after him, are not Group of 5 schools. Like those are big time schools. So what can you tell us there?
Well, so first of all, I would encourage, right now we've got 75% off an annual VIP subscription. It's only $27 for the entire year. And so if you want the full scoop, I would recommend subscribing if you haven't already. What I will say is that, broadly speaking, the way the portal works, Shiaz Pete is a spring graduate, so he is not enrolling right now, and he has more time to make a decision. And when you think about supply and demand and scarcity, there are a lot of teams that are desperate for offensive tackles. The offensive line play, I think, in college football isn't very good right now across the board for a lot of schools. We see Ohio State might win the national championship and run away with it, and they don't feel good about their offensive line. That's saying a lot, right? And so there are a lot of teams that would love to have Shiaz Pete, and if they have whiffed, if they've swung and missed early in the transfer portal, all of a sudden they're sitting here now on January 9th, and saying, oh God, do we have any options left who we think can start for us and play at a high level? Well, this guy from New Mexico State hasn't had to come off the board yet because he doesn't need to get enrolled for the spring semester. He's graduating, he's finishing out classes at New Mexico State, and then will enroll in June wherever he goes. And so I think that has led to a more significant market than what I expected, because he waited longer than I thought he would to pick a team. He still hasn't picked a team yet. And these offers are getting crazy. So we'll see. I'm not Shiaz Pete, and so I don't know how he's going to weigh money against other factors, but this is big time recruitment, and candidly, I don't know where it's going to go right now.
Yeah, I think he's enjoying that process. That's what I would say there.
And he should. He was a walk-on. Yeah. He was a walk-on at New Mexico State, so he never got a real recruitment, and I think that plays into this too. He should enjoy it. He's earned it.
I mean, we're learning that New Mexico State team had some talent that and some talent that is now moving on to bigger places. And I want to get to a lot more of those guys like a Trent Hudson, but I want to get to Marlen Sewell, withdraws from the portal and is going to come back to Vanderbilt. That was not something I had on my radar. So the lone Derek Mason recruit, I think, still left at Vanderbilt. You could prove me wrong there, Robbie, but I think that's kind of interesting. What's the story there? Because you bring in CJ Hurd from FAU, CJ Taylor and Ricky Wright are gone. Obviously, you still have Dante Carter, but I think that's really interesting. And he did play well in the bowl game, and has some ability. But I think some fans are really interested by that.
Yeah, and so if you subscribe, you got kind of consistent updates throughout this process. When he entered the portal, I reported that that was kind of mutual, and they were going to let him look around and see if he could find something that better fit what he was looking for. I would imagine that would be a starting job at a decent program. And essentially what happened is they had other safety targets who they were looking at. And I'll say this now because this is all over with, basically. They brought in Jeremiah Johnson from Georgia Tech on a visit. Or I'm sorry, from Georgia State on a visit, and Georgia Tech was the other team that was recruiting him. And they decided that they preferred Sewell. Vandy did, and they said, "Come on back, man, and we'll take you." And he agreed to do it. So I don't know if that's because they just thought that Sewell is straight up a better player than Jeremiah Johnson. That's possible. I don't know that. But there's also a money aspect of this too in college football. You have to think about this similar to the NFL, where they've got a certain amount that they can spend right now. They've got a certain amount of money, and they've got to decide if this guy is 10% better than Marlen Sewell, but he's going to be 50% more expensive, maybe that's not worth it. And Sewell already knows the system. He's good on special teams. He's a team captain, and he's a good citizen. I think those things matter to Vanderbilt. And I don't project him to be a starter right now. I think that's possible, but more likely I would see him as a true boundary safety because he's kind of more of a hard hitter. And so I would put him behind CJ Hurd, the transfer from FAU. And I think they need to give Dante Carter a shot to win this starting job at the field safety position, the free safety in the spring. I know he didn't have a great season, but he's like an 18, 19-year-old true freshman. They moved him. He was practicing when we saw him practicing in the fall and the spring, where he looked so good. He was playing high safety, and then they moved him during the season to play like coverage-oriented nickel corner, and he didn't do well at it. And so I don't think that's, I think once he gets back to playing his more natural position, maybe he'll blossom a little bit more. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of true freshmen who, even if they're top 150 or top 100 recruits, those guys in the SEC are not a lock to be good right away. And so I think they need to invest in him. That doesn't mean they couldn't recruit a one-year veteran starter ahead of him if he struggles in the spring. But I think that if they were to move on or recruit over Dante Carter this early, that would be a huge mistake, in my opinion.
All right. Last thing for you. We had a question on the board a couple of days ago. Out of receiver, running back, and edge rusher, what's the biggest need? And, you might even have another position out there, but how would you assess their needs right now still left in this spring portal window?
I think the top two, number one pretty clearly is offensive tackle. I think they need another tackle. And Porcher could play tackle. He has played some tackle in the past, but I think he would be better at guard probably. And I think it's very clear based on how they're operating who's the number one guy they're recruiting right now. Shiaz Pete. And so I think that says a lot, right? They want another offensive tackle. And I think that is probably the big one because it could help out a lot of the run game stuff and keeping Pavia healthy if they block better. They really struggled in that area, I think, especially down the stretch of the season. I think that wide receiver, they need a dog at wide receiver, in my opinion. People can agree or disagree on that. Totally understand that everybody's going to have a different opinion. But I just remember I went to all the games other than Mizzou this season in person. And I just remember sitting in that press box at Auburn. And that press box is a little different where it's behind one of the end zones, which isn't really a good view. But the one thing that does help with is you see the whole play, every play, and those receivers were not getting open, Billy. I mean, that I think Diego Pavia, I want to say he may have completed less than half of his passes in that game. Yeah. And it wasn't due to a lack of accuracy. Like his guys were covered. And so in my opinion, they need to go get somebody who has had 600, 700, 800 receiving yards at the FBS level, ideally the Power 4 level. Are those guys going to be expensive? Yes. But, I think they can find somebody. And to me, those are the two big needs because I don't know if they don't have an SEC number one wide receiver right now. I'm not sure if they have a number two either. And I think that's a very important position. Ohio State, if they win the national championship, again, coming back to them, those receivers are unbelievable. Yeah. Like the Rose Bowl and even the UT game, I mean, that's unstoppable. It's like Jeremiah Smith is 10 yards a pop every single time you target him. So that's just the way that I look at football. And I think that they really need to add some juice to that wide receiver room. So I would put those two at the top. And then you get into maybe, I think they need more defensive tackles to stop the run, some more depth there. Running back, we'll see. I mean, I get the complaints. I get that they could use some more speed there, but I just think tackle and wide receiver, like they gotta get two good players there. Those are at the top of my list.
Yeah, the running back thing, I feel more comfortable at the running back position than the receiver position right now. Now, not to say you can't or shouldn't bring in another running back, but the ultimate running back debate, I think, is trumped by the receiver card because Pavia is handing it to the running back, and Pavia is also a pseudo running back.
Well, offensive tackle, is Pavia going to be on the field to hand the ball off if he's getting sacked and injured? Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I would probably put tackle even above wide receiver at this point.
Mm-hmm. Robbie, appreciate it. We'll keep this conversation going. Obviously, Vanderbilt will continue to pick up guys in the portal, and we'll continue to talk a little football. But basketball, that obviously Vanderbilt lost Mississippi State, and I would assume you watched a lot of that. Mississippi State's pretty good.
The SEC is pretty good, right? I mean, I think it's tough. I sort of feel for Vandy in that they've made so much progress and they've really exceeded, I think, probably all of our expectations, and they're still just running into an absolute buzzsaw, more often than not in that league. But hey, I'm sure if you're a Vandy fan, it can't feel bad to at least be able to watch fun, exciting, and competent basketball for the first time.
Yeah. That's Robbie Weinstein. Of course, you can see all of his work on Vandy247.com. 75% offer there on the. That was our interview with Robbie Weinstein. Sorry, cut that off a little bit short there, but big time stuff there. Obviously, he's the go-to guy for Vanderbilt football and their portal activity, their recruiting classes, and everything in between. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to rumble through some questions and comments here. Connor, what position do you think we have acquired the most talent through the portal? I'd say offensive line. You bring in Isaiah Glass, Jordan White, also Sterling Porcher, who, and again, these guys are not just complete studs. And even Robbie said, like, this is not an above average. It's probably an average or slightly below average offensive line still. But these guys, it's still an upgrade from what they had last year. So I think offensive line, they fit the bill size-wise. Like Jordan White is a heavy pulling guard that's really athletic and can move really well. And then you look at Isaiah Glass, on the other hand, he's, Robbie compared him to a guy like Gunnar Hansen, but we'll see. Maybe these guys develop. And I mean, you have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country coaching them up in Chris Klonakis. So we'll see about that. And then, Porcher. So those guys are athletic. I'd say offensive line is a position that they've acquired the most talent in through the portal. Lucy says our dreams are big, but the schedule is still brutal. We are 12th in portal class. I think 7-5 is still the ceiling for this team. I would agree there right now. Now, again, say they land Shiaz Pete, say they land a stud receiver, say they land, another defensive tackle, defensive lineman, and a luxury pick at running back. Like, that's perfect world. Those next, if the next 4 players could be those positions, a stud left tackle, preferably Big Pete, stud receiver, another stud defensive lineman, and kind of a luxury selection at running back, like I said, the ceiling is not just 7-5 anymore. I think you bump that ceiling up to 8-4, and who knows, maybe 9 wins, but nine definitely feels a little bit wishful thinking there. Lucy also says, with living in the portal, new players are learning new offenses every year. This takes away from natural talent first half of every season. I would agree with that. I would agree with that as well. And then Hunter, can we find a way to get Tyler Tanner on the field? Well, Tanner's busy balling on the hardwood. I thought he played really well against Mississippi State, and I think the staff learned a lot about him in that game. I learned a lot about him. I think fans learned a lot about him. He's a really good player. He's got great basketball sense for a freshman. I think he's going to be really good down the road. He's already really good. It'll be interesting to see his minutes. I think he, by midway through SEC play, he could be kind of that lead dog at the point guard position. Hogarth's still going to play point, and of course, the thing is they've got some point guards. Everybody in the team's a point guard. So I say lead dog, but I think he needs to play more, and I think he will. I think he'll start to play more because he really impacted that game against Mississippi State. Speaking of Vanderbilt basketball, they will play Saturday at Missouri in Como, 2:30 tip-off on the SEC Network. You can listen to it on 102.5 The Game. Missouri is 1-1 in SEC play. Dennis Gates has done a really good job in the early going. Obviously had a really good first year, and then last year was awful. This year's a little bit better. I don't know that they have the first-team All-SEC player, but it's a good Missouri team. They beat LSU on Tuesday night. They opened SEC play last Saturday at Auburn and got walloped. But there's going to be a lot of teams that get walloped by Auburn. So, again, this is a good Missouri team. I think it's going to be a really good matchup. I think it's a very important game for both teams. For Vanderbilt, you need to win this game. For Missouri, you need to win this game. It is, you're starting to talk about desperation mode territory for both these teams. So, again, it's going to be interesting to see what happens Saturday. But, again, big thanks to Robbie Weinstein for joining me here today on the Thursday edition. I will see you guys next week. We'll iron out a schedule. I'll put it up on the board. Going to try to get Will Purdue on at some point. Can't promise next week, but definitely eventually here we'll get Will Purdue on. We'll have the roundtable next week. Luke White will be back. We'll get Joey Dwyer on eventually, and we'll talk all things Vanderbilt athletics next week. Before we wrap it up, though, this podcast has always been has always been free, and we plan for it to always be free. So here's how you can help keep it that way. Give us a review and a 5-star rating, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify. That helps us get noticed. And if you're listening or watching and haven't subscribed to Vandy 24/7, please do. We got a special 75% offer, $26.85, $26 for an entire year for the best Vanderbilt sports coverage ever. I mean, it really is. So, again, it's typically $99 a year. Special offer, 75% off, $26 a year. Special offer there. Subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel. That is blowing up. We've got rapid reactions after every game. We've got, stuff like this, the Vandy 24/7 live show Monday through Thursday, all kinds of stuff, press conferences, all kinds of special stuff there on the Vandy Sports YouTube channel. Like this video, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a question, and keep it going. That's free. All of that is free. And if you're interested in sponsoring the show, you want to be a part of this great Vanderbilt coverage, just email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And if you want to sponsor this show specifically, email myself, billyderrick10@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of Vandy 24/7 Live.